Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. We're now going to have our panel on defense metals and why they are so important in 2026. I'm Paul Harris, as you know, moderating this. I'm joined by, on the far side, John Anderson, CEO of Triumph Gold, and we have General Spider Marks, who's a Director at Allied Critical Minerals. Welcome, gentlemen. Why don't we start off with a very brief one-line description of who you are and what you do? General.
Retired Army General Officer, very familiar with a lot of the DoD, DOW demands and requirements today, and especially in light of what we see in Iran and how that impacts on rare earths and critical metal access.
I'm John Anderson. I'm the CEO of a company called Triumph Gold. I wasn't aware I was going to be sitting next to Tom Brady, and I'm just the water boy at dealing with the government issues, but been involved in the business for over 30 years in development, built 2 mines, and just see the opportunity in the defense metals, and we're really at the early stages of understanding what defense metals are. I don't know how many people were around back in the early 2000s when uranium took off. Every promoter went out and tried to find uranium deposits, and there weren't many experts in the uranium space at all. We're starting to see the same thing with the defense metals. It's fairly new. Defense metals that are basically a subsidiary of other type of minerals in mine deposits. So it's going to be a growth curve for people in the industry, and it's fun to be part of it.
Okay, now the defense metals narrative, I would argue it's always been there. It perhaps went into the background because the world enjoyed 30, 40 years of relative world peace. Perhaps with the turning point was Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. That's when the critical minerals and defense metals narrative really started to gain some traction. And of course, this year with the Iran conflict, the Persian Gulf conflict, that has perhaps been supercharged. Before we start talking, getting really into...
Can I challenge your opening comment?
Do, yeah.
Yeah. I think it predates the Russian invasion of Ukraine, certainly. We realize the vulnerability of our global interconnectivity with COVID, right? And over the course of 3 decades, our relationship with China and China's growth has put us in a position of interdependence. And we're like a ganglia economically and financially, and you cannot decouple that. So I think over the course of years, we've realized, again, predating just Ukraine in 2022, that we had these vulnerabilities and they didn't manifest themselves in a painful way until COVID. We had to move our way through COVID. And then to your very absolutely spot on point, all of a sudden becomes a realization with Ukraine that we've got some real challenges.
Okay, before we get sort of deeper into that, and I appreciate the sort of clarification or modification to my...
I promise not to be an ass.
No, please do. We like a bit of good, healthy debate. What are we talking about when we're talking about defense metals? Because, you think of bullets, you think of guns, you think of airplanes and tanks. At one very basic level, you've got all the industrial metals there. You need steel, you need aluminium, you need nickel, you need copper. Without any of those, you won't have any of the good stuff, the high-end stuff. But we really are, in this conversation, perhaps more talking about the high-end stuff, and that's the rare earth elements, the heavy rare earths, the tungsten, the antimony, the more exotic things that people have never heard of sort of 5 years ago. For you, what are the really sort of critical elements or minerals we should be thinking about when we're talking about defense metals?
I think he's, asking the question is really, what are they and what are they used for? And they're essentially metals that are used for advanced weaponry infrastructure. Historically, it would be the tungstens, antimonies, et cetera. Now you've also got niobium, which is really important for telecommunications infrastructure, and of course copper. And the list is going to go on. It's not just relative or related to the 4 that we just mentioned. There's just a number of them, and we're just starting to learn how to deal with that. There's a supply shortage of it for sure. The United States and Canada used to be the largest miners of tungsten, and now they produce essentially nothing.
Yeah, I would say, if I can pile on
Yep.
to John's comment, rare earths are not rare, they're just rare to us. I mean, many of these are surface laid. We just have to go get them. And the United States got rid of the Bureau of Mining back in '96. So anybody who's in the mining business in the United States, you're an economic pariah, you're a NIMBY. And so we have to work our way through that. And then, as John indicated, you go through the list very easily. I mean, from my perspective, from a soldier's perspective, I immediately just start Googling this stuff. And I go, okay, what does NATO give a shit about? So NATO has a list of 11, and they're all kind of laid out there. And you go, I got it. Okay, let's focus in on those. And then, based on our alliances and partnerships, where can we now have a more favorable access to within some nation, some geographic sphere that will allow us to go access that in some type of partnership?
Now, General, from a military perspective and a military planning perspective, why are these particular elements so critical? Why is it important to have more tungsten or more antimony than your potential future enemy?
Yeah, you look at the stockpiles. Look at what's happening in Iran right now. In fact, let me take a step back. About a month ago, the Department of War came forward and said they have a 200 billion OCO, Oconus Contingency Operation, OCO, which means we're running out of money, we need more money, it's not the budget, give us more money. And we did that over the course of about 20 years with our efforts in Afghanistan and Iraq. It was kind of a matter of course. We build the budget, you get it approved, and all of a sudden you start breaking stuff. You have additional operations you got to conduct. You plan for it, you estimated what that looked like, but the coffers got short, so you came back with an OCO. So a little bit of history there. So DOW about a month ago said we got 200 billion we need. What they were saying is what we have accomplished with the Israelis in Iran in our effort on Epic Fury is we started to deplete our stockpiles of kit, ammunition, food stores, et cetera. And all the combatant commanders, those are the 4 stars that own different pieces of geography and have component operate, like Special Operations Command does not own a piece of geography. They just know how to enter into every piece of geography and do what they need to do and then get out. So all of those individuals have a list of requirements against which they are evaluated every day. It's called their readiness. I've got to do all this list of stuff. And 24/7, their heads-up display is, am I equipped? Am I manned? Can I have access to the necessary units, organizations, stockpiles to do my job? Each one of those other combatant commanders, other than Central Command, that had a priority access to those stockpiles, they came back and said, I'm short on X, or I'm short on Y, or I'm short on Z. DOD gets those inputs 24/7. It's a matter, within microseconds. And they go forward and go, we're running out of this shit. I guess we need to go back and buy more of it. So the point is, within that stockpile, we have, within the Department of Defense, Department of War, a thing called the Defense Logistics Agency. They are the guys that have the intellectual and physical repositories of what we need, when we need, and what the minimum essentials are. So that's where we are right now.
Okay, now let's bring in a broader context. The Ukraine-Russia war has been going on for 4 years, and I think a year or two ago there was a point in time when the US perhaps, I think they stopped sending 155mm shells because they were running down their own stockpile. So to your comment about operational readiness, presumably the generals are saying, if we keep supplying Ukraine at the rate we are, our operational readiness is compromised. With the startup of the Iran conflict, those first few days or first couple of weeks, a lot of ordnance and high-tech ordnance, the best of the best was going both ways or 3 ways. What is the status now? Is that the real reason there's a ceasefire, because all sides were running low on stuff to throw at the other side?
So I would say that would be too logical a rationalization for a ceasefire. I would say, and I am not a political beast, I've worn a uniform my entire life, so I don't get into that. I think these are immense political pressures on this administration. I can't speak for this administration. I'm not inside the president's head, and I've not worked for the man. But I would say there are legitimate concerns, and I'm sure he's getting the political whispers that say, we got to end this thing. From the soldier's perspective, the strategic desired outcome was never established. I mean, I could have posited one of those, but from a tactical and operational perspective, We met those objectives probably at week 1.5 or week 2. We're now into about almost a 3-month period. And we could have said, our work is done here. We still would have had a concern. We have a routine concern in terms of our stockpiles. But when you look at where we are today relative to all that, I think the ceasefire has more to do with how do we untangle ourselves, a much longer discourse on what's happening in the Straits of Hormuz, our relationships with the new regime, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a ganglia of problems right now. I think that is the primary effort right now is we've got global, we've not seen these regional conflicts that we've experienced over the course since the collapse of the Soviet Union, regional conflicts, right? Pretty significant. They've all been bounded, and there has not been an economic downside to almost any of those, concomitant to what's going on regionally, kinetically. We're seeing it now, and that's the problem.
Is that because of the changing nature of warfare? If we go back 30, 40 years, it was aircraft, tanks, and machine gun bullets. Now it's more high-end missiles and things of that nature, drones. Obviously, they require different types of materials, and the materials they require are more scarce.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. And the kind of the short narrative is the destructive power. What was accomplished, just by way of comparison, what was accomplished in the first 18 hours of Epic Fury in terms of destructive capability and precision, to your point, was the equivalent to the first 30 days of our engagement in Iraq in 2003. The shock and awe, that we accomplished that in about 18 hours in Iran.
Okay, a lot of munitions, a lot of war material was used, consumed, if you like, and getting into your comments about the defense stockpile agency, the need to replenish. I mean, this is why we're here. This is why we're talking about defense metals, the need to deplenish. Because at the end of the day, combat readiness is one thing, but history has shown usually the victor in a war is the one that's best supplied, best financed, has the best logistics, not necessarily the best technology, but the one that can keep the effort going for longer. So bringing this into talking more about the defense metals themselves, let's bring in John on this. With so much war material expended this year, the need to replenish, that must be the top of mind for the Defense Logistics Agency, Department of War and things like that. So the RFP is going out for okay, the tungsten, the antimony, where are we going to get this from? That must be a key thing here in Washington and the various defense sites. John, to what extent is the industry able to respond to what could be a large order of stuff coming down there?
I think what's happened is we saw a big slap in the face is what happened, is people realize that, oh God, we don't have any of this material. And we got to, China's essentially controls most of it. China is not definitely an ally to the United States, but it was dependent on China for tungsten, for example. As of June or January, I think, of this year, they stopped selling tungsten into the local market. They have 3/4 or 80% of the reserves, and they have half the production. We have that in Canada. We have the largest, richest tungsten mine operated. Greg used to work for Amex, and it was the richest tungsten mine in the world, and it shut down in 1981. And then you've got another one that's got 5% tungsten up and controlled by fireweed zinc. But these are going to take years and years. I think what's going on in Africa, for example, I go there a lot. They're actually mining tungsten right at source. They're not even drilling it. In Canada, in the United States, we got to drill, prove something off, 43101. The Chinese, the Israelis, and the Turks are just going and just buying raw ore and shipping it. That won't compare to what we're trying to do and build world-class deposits. But again, it was a slap in the face. So all these companies that are in gold and copper, I just spoke to Greg yesterday, and he said he's got a pure antimony showing right on his property, and you can trace it with tungsten in it. We've got the same thing in a resource up in the Yukon, for example. We've got in 2020 when we did our resource, there was tungsten and molybdenum, essentially no value for it. with the new tungsten price and the molybdenum price, the value of the rock went up about $4 billion in the existing 43101 deposit. So again, slap in the face. So I'm sure you're going to see a lot of these other companies look on their own properties and look for critical metals.
Okay. From your perspective, or from the mineral producer perspective, what is the bottleneck? Is it permitting? Is it finance? If the general's given you a call saying we need more stuff tomorrow, is it a case of, okay, well, give us this amount of money, we can deliver, or is it a question of finance? Or
it's getting approvals to actually start moving rock and capital, especially in the Canadian marketplace, as I think one of the gentlemen was saying, is that they can't participate in small little companies. So it's capital deprived. That's the biggest thing.
What about refining? Is that?
That's a good question. We have none in Canada. The United States doesn't. Most of it just goes right to China. They refine it. Rwanda's got one that they're building right now.
Well, that's good news.
Yep. And they're an ally of the United States, so.
Yeah.
So given that, our sort of topic is why defense metal is so much more important in 2026, how has perhaps the geopolitical sphere rotated? Because if the US has expended a large part of its munitions, high-end munitions, there isn't the friendly sources of the material to replace those or replenish those, so that the generals are mission ready. Does that change the geopolitical sphere and who actually has the power?
Well, it certainly does. And what it really demonstrates is that we are part of a network and a community of those with whom you hope you share common values and common mission focus and characteristics and outlooks in terms of being a part of the community of nations. So at the grand strategic level, we need to make sure that we've got partners and friends with whom we can rely, and that's based on predictability. And any relationship in life is based on predictability. And I think, again, we've challenged that relationship of predictability. We're seeing that played out in living color right now. I mean, our president has indicated that we are going to, in a military perspective, we're going to remove close to 5,000 troops that are in Germany. That by itself is kind of sort of no big deal. We have an increasing relationship in Poland, but we had some rotational units that have now been pulled off those rotations, and you go, where'd that come from? We could all hazard a guess where it came from, but just know. So it's a matter of having a level of predictability that allows you, in a moment of concern, with an understanding that you're going to have to be able to rely on some form of behavior, and it's going to be there for you. Well, we've challenged that in many, many cases. So it does challenge those geopolitical perspectives. In particular, you look at NATO. NATO has all agreed to 5% GDP growth in terms of national defense. Everybody signed up for it with a wink and a nod. I've spent a lot of time in NATO. We have friends, and we have friends who kind of shoot us the bird. And so, and I got it. I mean, everybody's got their own challenges, and they show up with what they can show up with. But when you sign up for a contract, look at the four corners of that contract, and by God, do what you said you're going to do, or we're going to put a little mirror in front of your face and say, okay, let's go. Get your act together. Let's go. So the good news is everybody said, for a whole bunch of reasons, yep, we'll increase from 2% to 5%. Over the course of probably the next few years, that'll happen. Some countries are already leading the charge. Poland leading the charge. Portugal is a great example. Tungsten is available in Portugal, and a great history and tradition of mining. So it's a wonderful country, and Allied Critical Metals is involved in that. We have mines up in the vicinity of Braga, north of Porto. And so you go to the government of Portugal, and we're completely aligned with those guys. So this effort that we have has been named a project of national importance. In other words, we care about it. Lisbon cares about it. And by the way, the 5% is Portugal is leading the way in terms of very creative implementation of what that 5% of. Portugal is a little nation. I don't need Portugal to build tanks. I don't need a bunch of other infantrymen coming from Portugal. You want to do your part? Improve your port. Make sure you have complete access to Lisbon. Make sure you can get into Porto. Make sure your infrastructure, your 4-lane highways are squared away. create training and industry and education to maintain this environment of a favorable economic climate. All of that, I could list that as my contribution to NATO, and I'd give them an A+. And nobody in NATO evaluates each nation and says, hey, Germany, you got to build more tanks, and hey, France, give me some good food, and all that kind of stuff. You don't go to the Brits for food, let me tell you that. But
I'm going to pick you up on that.
come on. Come on. Well, I can tell some stories, but and you don't go. You know who? Anecdotally, I know we're being recorded. If I insult somebody in the room, keep it to yourself. I was deployed with NATO for 2 years in the Balkans during OAF, Operation Allied Force, going after Milosevic, a bunch of bad guys. And whenever we had to maneuver forces and do things that required discharging live bullets, you'd go to different nations and you'd say, okay, you own this piece of the terrain and this is a mission, you've got it. And they would always go, okay, wait, got to go back to my capital to get authorization. I know I'm in this military organization, but I got to get approval. The one country that would always come back with the red card, we're not going to do what you tell us to do. Spain. Thank you, Spain. So my point is, each nation will interpret how they want to meet their obligation. Portugal's doing a very creative way of saying, we want to help, and by the way, we want to help in a complementary way that makes what the Brits do better, that makes what the French do better, that makes what the Italians do better.
Okay. In terms of how government or governments can really sort of push this and enable the mineral explorers and developers to actually get the metals out that are required. If we go back, look at the Second World War, it's a period of time of great innovation. I was watching a really good video the other day of how the US government funded the extraction of magnesium from seawater to provide it to the aircraft. Without that, the US Air Force wouldn't have been able to grow and do the mission it did so successfully. During that time, through the Defense Acts, that's when we saw a lot of mines built, such as stibnite in Idaho. The imperative was, we need the metal, just get it done. We'll worry about the environmental or other things later on. Given the criticality of certain defense metals, do you see the possibility of those kind of pieces of legislation being used to not circumvent permitting, but to sort of get past that hurdle to, okay, we need it today, just get it done?
Short answer is yes.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to see it right now.
I think you're also going to see the market take a bigger action. The market is probably the best indication of anything. The market is buying these commodities up. Greed's going to kick in, and money's going to come back into the sector and try to move these projects along as quickly as possible.
Okay. Big picture stuff. President Trump, since pretty much day one, since his first term, about Make America Great Again, reshoring productive capacity. My view on that at the end of the day is you need to have factories in the United States if you want to be able to make tanks, planes, or drones now. So that would seem to be at the basic industrial base. That's a key part of his initiative. To have that war readiness, you need to have an automobile factory in Detroit that you can switch to tanks or B-52s or whatever it is. Is that sort of how you see the evolution of Trump's economic policy?
I do. In fact, we're seeing the beginning of that right now, right? And I think, for example, I don't think we've built a refinery in the United States since the 70s. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean we don't have them, but they're not state of the art, and maybe necessarily where they need to be. So I look at that and I go, yeah, this is an initiative that this administration has taken on. We won't realize that the full effect, the fulsome effect of that for a decade. But it needs to take place now. That's why I think over the course of time, we're always the challenge that our form of democracy, we have 2-year election cycles, right? So everything gets very episodic and kind of crazy. If those are in fact in place, I think that becomes a dampening in terms of both political and economic swings in a particular way. If we're looking at a horizon of X number of years that will go well beyond Trump 2.0 into whatever administration follows subsequently. So it's absolutely a good thing.
And you're seeing that in Canada as well. Canada's starting to build up a budget and created a a whole plan to build out the military, build submarines, for example, for the first time ever. But they're not obviously going to be as fast as the United States, but they're moving.
One sort of final question, and perhaps looking to what the future may hold. A lot of the things we've been talking about in terms of NATO rearmament, Poland building up its forces, building, tanks, 155 millimeter shells. I mean, they're conventional weapons. What we're seeing in Russia, Ukraine, what we're seeing in the Iran conflict is more, in Iran, certainly more advanced weapons with the hypersonic missiles and things of that nature. But in Russia and Ukraine, it's at face value, it's perhaps more of a conventional conflict, but it's being fought in a very modern, unconventional way. It's not soldiers shooting each other, it's drone pilots dropping stuff on the soldiers. General, how do you see the future of conflict evolving? And you don't need that much material in a drone compared to a hypersonic missile, for example, or a cruise missile or a Tomahawk missile. But that's the way things are going, and that's already having repercussions in the Gulf. The US pulled its fleet back because it wanted to be out of range of some of these things.
Yeah, it's a one. I mean, that is really the question. What are the key lessons learned that we're extracting from both the conflict in Ukraine and the conflict in the Mideast, and what we saw when Iran and Israel went to war about 1.5 years ago? What we've realized is that there needs to be, but we've always embraced this, but we need to more clearly define it, that there needs to be a conventional and an ability to conduct conventional and unconventional warfare, those asymmetries that we talk about simultaneously in a whole bunch of different theaters. That's kind of number one. Number two is we have to replenish to your question, our conventional stockpiles. There will forever be a requirement for boots on the ground and over-the-shoulder support. If I can't engage, I need somebody from a distance to start killing people way in front of me so that when I get into a fight, that enemy is depleted significantly. That's called artillery. So it's missiles, that's aircraft, that's drones, et cetera. And then the advance of the application of drones, those unmanned, those unattended systems has really proliferated, but we have to be careful about the lesson learned. In Ukraine, the lesson learned from drones is you move, you die. Because what you have above you is a constellation of drones 24/7. You light a cigarette, you're dead. You go hit the John, you're dead. And so you have this, we're stuck in the mud. This is a World War I battlefield because the Ukrainians, neither the Ukrainians nor the Russians have the ability to conduct maneuver warfare to dislocate their enemy. That's army speak for you got to get around them and scare the shit out of them and they have to go away. They can't do that. So you have this frozen conflict in Ukraine. Then what you see in comparison is an incredibly weakened, feckless regime in Tehran can completely freeze up and alter the global economic market through unattended systems and the ability to do that. Because their tolerance for pain is incredibly high and incredibly long. We don't have that because of political and economic pressures. So the lessons are clearly, we got to do more of what we have. We got to acknowledge that you got to do multiple things simultaneously that require access to and the refining of and the processing of those critical metals that allow us to do that. Otherwise, we're clearly going to be buying stuff that is essential, but is not going to be complete.
Okay, thank you. Anything to add to that?
Just to answer your question more on that specifically is, if you look at communication is going to be essential and anti-missile, and so that's why niobium, for example, would be one of the top metals that people don't really talk about, but it's essential for communications.
Excellent. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. This has been a fascinating conversation for me personally. I've got a master's in international relations, so talking about these kind of things is very much my interest. Please join me in thanking General Marks and John Anderson.
Thank you.
Pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.